40 minutes ago, something happened inside Brussels that could shift the balance of power across the entire European Union. A confidential investigative report, kept from the public for weeks, has now been leaked to several major European newspapers. Within minutes of the leak appearing online, emergency meetings were called inside the headquarters of the European Commission. Security teams restricted access to multiple floors of the Parlement building. Phones across European ministries began ringing non-stop. Because the contents of that report do not describe a minor administrative problem, they describe a system of political power that may have been operating in the shadows of European institutions for years. And at the center of it all is a network of decisions involving billions of euros, strategic infrastructure projects, and a group of senior officials whose authority reaches into almost every corner of the European Union. The moment the document became public, analysts across Europe recognized this was not another routine political controversy. This was something much larger. Financial markets reacted almost immediately. The euro slipped against the dollar. European infrastructure stocks began fluctuating. Government advisors rushed to read the full document before journalists could publish further details. Because if even half of the claims inside the report are confirmed, the political consequences could reshape the future of European governance. The investigation began quietly 3 months ago inside the European Financial Transparency Office, an oversight body responsible for auditing how EU funds are spent across member states. Normally, these audits receive almost no public attention. Most reports deal with routine accounting checks, administrative corrections, or technical compliance reviews. But during a scheduled audit of the Strategic Infrastructure Development Fund, investigators noticed something unusual. Several large projects approved in the previous fiscal cycle contained documentation gaps that could not easily be explained. Some contracts appeared to have been approved before the official tender process had even begun. Other files referenced review committees that did not appear in the public administrative record. At first, investigators assumed these were bureaucratic mistakes. Large institutions often produce complicated paperwork trails. But when auditors began comparing dozens of project files side by side, a pattern started to appear. The same consulting firms appeared repeatedly in multi-billion euro infrastructure contracts. The same internal approval pathway appeared across multiple projects. And in several cases, authorization signatures pointed to a very small circle of senior officials inside Brussels. That discovery triggered a deeper investigation. According to preliminary findings contained in the leaked report, approximately 34 billion euros worth of infrastructure projects were approved through a fast-track administrative mechanism, one that bypassed several layers of normal procurement review. Officially, that mechanism exists only for urgent strategic emergencies. Examples include natural disasters, cross-border security infrastructure, or emergency energy supply projects. But investigators found no evidence that the projects in question met those criteria. Instead, the fast-track mechanism appeared to have been used repeatedly for ordinary industrial and infrastructure investments. That raised a troubling question. Who authorized the bypassing of the normal procurement system, and why? When investigators followed the internal authorization chain upward through the Commission bureaucracy, the paper trail narrowed to a handful of high-level policy offices responsible for coordinating strategic development initiatives across Europe. Those offices control some of the largest financial flows within the European Union. They oversee investment programs that determine where major energy corridors are built, where digital infrastructure expands, and where industrial development funds are allocated. In other words, they influence decisions that can shape the economic future of entire regions. The report also identified a cluster of private consulting and engineering firms that repeatedly received contracts connected to these accelerated approvals. Many of the companies involved had previously worked with European institutions as policy advisors or technical experts. That fact alone is not unusual. Governments frequently hire experienced consulting firms for large infrastructure projects. But the concentration of contracts raised serious questions. In several cases, companies received multiple large contracts without open competitive bidding. Investigators found that documentation explaining the selection process was incomplete or missing. Some project files included only brief internal notes describing the contracts as strategically aligned. For financial auditors, that phrase is a warning sign. It suggests decisions may have been made outside normal procurement rules. Once the report began circulating among European governments, the reaction was immediate. Germany requested a full legal review of the procurement procedures used in the projects. France asked the European Commission to provide detailed documentation explaining the accelerated approval mechanism. Poland demanded transparency regarding the oversight committee responsible for the decisions. Italy's finance ministry began reviewing contracts connected to infrastructure projects affecting Mediterranean energy routes. Each request increased pressure on Brussels, because if member states lose confidence in how EU funds are managed, the entire financial structure of the Union becomes politically vulnerable. The European Union operates through shared trust. Member states contribute money to joint funds on the assumption that those funds are administered fairly and transparently. If that trust weakens, national governments begin demanding greater control over how money is spent. And when that happens, the entire process of European integration begins to slow down. Financial markets are extremely sensitive to political instability inside large economic blocs. Within hours of the report leak, analysts at several investment banks issued caution notes to clients monitoring European political risk. The euro experienced mild volatility. Infrastructure investment firms connected to projects mentioned in the report saw increased trading activity. Bond markets remained stable for now, but several financial institutions quietly began evaluating potential scenarios if the investigation expands. Because the real risk is not the initial report. The real risk is what investigators may uncover next. Inside the European Commission headquarters, the situation has become tense. Officials spent most of the day in closed-door meetings discussing how to respond publicly. Several departments began conducting internal reviews of project approval procedures. Senior administrators are attempting to determine whether the accelerated approval framework was used appropriately, or whether procurement rules were violated. So far, the Commission has released only a brief statement. The statement confirmed that an internal review is underway and that the Commission will cooperate fully with financial oversight authorities. But it did not answer the questions now circulating across Europe. Who authorized the fast-track approvals? Why were procurement procedures bypassed? And how many additional projects may be affected? Political observers across Europe are now warning that the investigation could trigger the most serious institutional crisis the European Union has faced in years. Not because of a single project, not because of one administrative mistake, but because the report raises a deeper question about how power operates inside Europe's most important institutions. If decisions involving tens of billions of euros were made through informal networks rather than transparent procedures, the political consequences could spread quickly. Opposition parties across several member states have already begun calling for parliamentary investigations. Transparency groups are demanding full publication of the audit report, and journalists across Europe are searching for additional documents connected to the case. For now, The investigation continues, but everyone inside Brussels understands something important. The first leak has already happened. And when the next set of documents emerges, the political storm currently building over Europe may become impossible to contain. Within 24 hours of the first report leaking to the press, the atmosphere inside Brussels had completely changed. What initially looked like a financial irregularity had now turned into a full-scale political investigation. Government officials across Europe were no longer treating the situation as a bureaucratic review. They were treating it as a crisis that could threaten the credibility of the entire European Union. The pressure was growing by the hour. Inside the Berlaymont building, where the European Commission operates, senior administrators began receiving requests for documentation from multiple member states. Germany demanded complete procurement records. France requested internal communications connected to the fast-track approval mechanism. Poland asked for clarification on the legal authority used to bypass normal tender procedures. Each request forced Brussels to confront the same uncomfortable reality. The investigation was no longer under its control. As auditors continued reviewing financial records connected to the infrastructure fund, another disturbing discovery emerged. Several project files referenced internal oversight meetings that had supposedly taken place during the approval process. But when investigators attempted to locate minutes from those meetings, they found something strange. The records simply did not exist. There were no official transcripts, no recorded agendas, no documented vote counts. In some cases, the only evidence that the meetings had ever happened was a single authorization signature attached to the final contract approval. For experienced financial investigators, that pattern raised serious concerns. Large public contracts are normally surrounded by layers of documentation designed to ensure accountability. When those layers are missing, investigators immediately ask whether the process was deliberately simplified in order to avoid oversight. That possibility is exactly what auditors were now beginning to consider. The program at the center of the investigation had originally been created to accelerate development across the European Union. Its purpose was simple: to finance major cross-border infrastructure projects that individual member states might struggle to fund on their own. These projects included energy pipelines, digital communication networks, transportation corridors, and renewable power grids. Over the past decade, the program had financed hundreds of major initiatives across Europe. Many of them were widely praised for strengthening economic cooperation between member states. But the program's size also made it vulnerable. Billions of euros moved through the system every year, and the complexity of the approval process meant that only a small group of senior administrators truly understood how all the financial decisions were made. That concentration of knowledge created the perfect environment for influence.